they said, oh, we're going to do better. We're going to get these kids into proper places. They're going to be put into beds. They're not going to sleep on the floor in these offices, you know. And then a follow-up report was done 6 months later. And guess what they found? Kids still on the floors, makeshift pallets on the floors. I don't quite understand the system, how it works, but if you bring a child into the DCFS system, shouldn't there be a bed somewhere for that child until, you know, things can get processed and they can move, you know, further into the system? How does that work?
It's supply and demand, just like anything. I can't talk about the cases I'm involved with, but I will say that I'm aware of situations where there were two foster children who were siblings and they had to be separated because they didn't have a placement. And they ended up being put well out. They were from Chicago and they were placed well outside of the Chicago area because there wasn't anything available at the time.
That happens, and it okay. When they say the kids were sleeping on the floor, what was the time frame? Because what the caseworkers have to do is they have to find a family that's going to take the kids, and sometimes they start with relatives, and if relatives say no, then they go outside. And yes, some children, yes, you know, I've never witnessed that, and it's possible. But the caseworkers work diligently to find a placement for them. If you're limited in the foster home and the number of foster homes that you can place that kid in based on their age, then you might see that. But I hope it's not like for days and stuff like that.
In this case, it was for days. I understand something happens in the middle of the night or, you know, after hours, and a child, you got to do the best you can until the office opens up, okay, until things can start moving the next day. I get that. But when it goes on for, you know, many days into weeks,
yes,
and this same situation is going, hey, come on. If I had a puppy, I would make a pallet on the floor for that puppy, and that puppy might be okay. A child does not need to exist in a situation like that, going through traumatic situations already, not knowing what's going to happen next. And the best you can do is leave them on the floor for multiple days. You know,
like I said, I've never witnessed that. And I do know that when a kid comes in, that social worker is with that child until that child is placed. There's no such thing as leaving and going home to your life and whatever you have on your agenda. You stay with that child until you find a family. And a lot of times, what will happen is you'll have families who do siblings, will take in the siblings, and they'll collaborate with another family that might have a sibling and say, hey, do you have a place in your home for that kid? So that's really sad that happened in Chicago, that the kids were sleeping on the floor for days. I've never seen that because the offices are not, they don't have any place for them to lay their head.
Well, it did happen, and 6 months later, the situation was still going on. So, of course, the people in charge, the powers that be, made some kind of excuse, and I'm sure there's going to be another follow-up on it, which I will be watching closely for to see when this next thing, next news article comes out, if things have gotten better. But I want to go back to the problems that these kids have. We know that ADD is a problem. A lot of times it's hearing impairments, vision issues. And could these symptoms be reasons why there's not as many foster parents as there could be? Because these kids have serious problems?
That definitely could be a part of it. There's a number of reasons why somebody might want to foster parent. It could be the goodness of their heart. It could be perhaps they had some experience in the foster system and feel like they want to give back and help. In my experience, and I know that I'm just a portion of this, there were a lot of folks in my class, because you go through a parent training class, who had dealt with infertility and were specifically looking for younger children. They essentially wanted to replicate the adoption process, but with adoption being very, very expensive, this was seen as an alternate route. And you don't commonly get a single baby in foster care. You might get a sibling group or an older child, just because it takes time for, quote unquote, the system, the support system that's in place to realize that a child is truly endangered and should be brought into foster care. So I think there's just a number of reasons that get into it. And then unfortunately, I think if you reach out to other foster parents to ask what their experience has been, you don't get a lot of it's sunshine and roses, everybody should do it sort of stories. You got, I tend to be realistic, but I certainly don't want to over dramatize anything, because these are children. But who's to say that other folks might not be, oh, it was terrible, so-and-so had this issue and they had that issue. At the end of the day, it's not the child's fault, but not necessarily everybody can understand that, I guess. I don't know. Shamar, I think you've been wanting to make a comment for a while, so I want to make sure that I pause and leave space for you, and don't talk too much.
It was to a point earlier, but I did forget it. But I believe in my world, it's lack of education. The people that I know who want to adopt fear the unknown. They fear the children who may have special needs, and they are not equipped to care for these children. And thank you for that, Amy. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay.
Talking about the sorry.
No, yeah, that's just my experience from the world that I'm in.
Okay. Now, those of you that know me, I'm a stats guy, right? I will go through the data to get
that's stats too here.
There you go, to get to
go ahead,
because the numbers
I got my stats.
The numbers don't lie unless somebody's putting in right numbers. So what I found is Child and Family Services has established a national standard for child abuse in foster care at 99.68%. That's the national standard. So that means that the state standard would only be 1.34 of foster children to experience some kind of abuse at the hands of their foster parents or the facility staff members. How that scale is not balanced correctly, I don't think. Nationally, you got 99.68, but individually on the state level, 1.34%. Are the states not reporting? Any thoughts?
Well, I'll talk about that. One of the things I mentioned earlier about the rate of children in the foster system, for instance, in Illinois, had gone up 30-50%. But I was also reading for a period of time, at least in places like California and Florida, the rate had gone down, maybe 10% or so. So it's like, why is that? And the theory is on that is because during COVID, we were all stuck at home and that sort of thing. Abuse was not reported. And the abuse did not come up later until the child went to school. The teacher or whoever found out about it, they were a mandated reporter, and they have to report those things. And that's where those numbers started rising.
Got you.
So there was a period of that, at least maybe not necessarily in Illinois, but in other parts of the country.
I would believe that. Absolutely.
Okay. I read an article, sorry, excuse me. I read an article today that stated that what Charlie is saying is true, because the visits are virtual with caseworkers and parents, and since you don't know who's in the room in the background with the kids could be afraid to say This person isn't feeding me. This person is hitting me. This person is sexually assaulting me. So that is something that has changed a lot because of the pandemic. Because the caseworkers would go in and they do talk to the children one-on-one without any adults present and give
Yeah.
them the opportunity to tell. And kids will tell one way or the other. They will tell.
Okay.
But I feel like if you're gonna be abusive, don't do it.
Okay.
Don't.
Now, because this is diverse talking heads, and I want to really get down into this, and sometimes I feel that I pull back on the questioning. I'm going to go a little deeper this time. Amy, at our last episode, we happened to see your daughter in the background.
Yeah, she snuck in.
Yep, she snuck in, and
Something.
she's a pretty little African American girl.
Mhm.
And she just melted all of our hearts. I thought Vincent was going to pass out. He was so
Probably did afterwards. But yeah.
But I want to nationally, Black children are represented at a rate that's like 1.6, like 2% higher than the national average. As a foster mother to a Black child, how has that impacted you?
I'm not important. How has it impacted her? But no, thank you. That is a very, very deep question. It is so heartbreaking. So the framework that I have learned from being a foster parent is that the reason that foster care exists is because that child's natural family across generations has failed. And I think a lot of folks naively believe, oh, well, they're just bad parents. And I'm not saying that's not sometimes the case. But what I have experienced just in my narrow framework is that that family across generations has been utterly failed by systems that society should have built to support that family. And that unfortunately, Black African Americans suffer that failure more so than other cultures. And it's awful and wrong. And or a foster family kind of comes in at the very tail end of the process, whereas Karen has already said, you try to place with grandma, you try to place with a cousin, you try to place with somebody, you try to place with a neighbor, somebody the child knows, so that you're not ripping them out of their entire home and putting them with strangers. As nice and as well-meaning as those strangers might be, they're still strangers, and I can't imagine what it is like to go through that as a child. So the way it has impacted me is that I've learned so much and really had the opportunity to realize all of the privileges that I never gave a second thought to, because I did not grow up with a lot of money. Our roof leaked, but I was never going to get put into foster care because people just believe that, well, they're going through hard times, but they're good people. Other people, perhaps because of the color of their skin or where they live or the family that they have, are not given that choice. So what I try to do for my daughter, and I actually have two that are Black, only one of them snuck in. And then my oldest daughter is my natural daughter. So she is white. She's not Black. We try to, they're not going to be raised by Black parents, which is incredibly unfortunate for them. We try to not make it so that somewhere down the road, what somebody said to me once, and this really resonated with me, and it's just so hard for me to make this point, I really apologize, and I hope I'm doing okay, is that you don't want your daughter to be the only one at the sleepover that doesn't know how to care for her hair. Or you don't want your daughter to be the only one at the winter holidays who's never heard of Kwanzaa because her stupid parents didn't know to teach it to her. So we know we are going to fail and not do as well, but we're going to try so that I don't ever want to ever present myself as somebody that saved this child,
Right.
because really I'm a part of a system that's failing and I'm just